This is the logo. That shit clean.
Social media, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok.
We're gonna get started in a second, Israel. Bear with me.
That shit was
Salaki Israel. Shalom, Yahweh Shem Yahushua Baraka Thumb to the brothers, Yahweh Shamar done by Shem Yahushua to the sisters. I'm Priest Officer Quran Yahweh, the I.S.U.P.K under Commander General YAHANNA, and welcome to another installment of Criminals of the Caucasus. Young man Jesus, Yahweh Shem Yahushua Baraka the water for tapping in. So tonight we're gonna get into this devil Al Capone. You understand? The life and crimes of Al Capone. Now, of course, let me share my screen real quick. Of course, you know, I'm not just only going to cover, you know, like organized crime figures and things of that nature. You understand? I'm gonna try to be versatile. You understand? And a lot of these devils that I'm cover, you understand, because the thing about Caucasians are, right, and Salakia, let me get a scripture real quick. Bear with me, Baba Kasha. The thing about Caucasians, they are a very subtle people. You understand? These people lie in wait. So a lot of them that are not outwardly criminals, you understand? The majority of them, should I say, are not outwardly criminals, but they indulge in some of the worst type of crimes that humanity has ever seen. You understand? This is the book of Psalms, chapter 55 and verse 21. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter. You understand? Like a lot of these Caucasians that are criminals in their heart, because this is their culture. You understand? They understand how to speak smoothly to people. You understand? They understand how to make you feel at ease with their speech. You understand? When they sitting back having a intellectual conversation, you could be talking to the most vulgar human being on planet Earth. You understand? You could be talking to a person that commit crimes, you understand, that you couldn't fathom in your mind that a human being can actually do. You understand? But you won't know it because, like Psalms 55 and 21 said, the words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. And it's always war in these Caucasians' heart. You understand? Whether it's man, woman, or child, right? His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. Like these Caucasians, these criminals, you understand, of the Caucasus, right? They can mesmerize you and hypnotize you with the speech of someone who's a law-abiding citizen. But meanwhile, you understand, they'll unalive you at the drop of a dime. You understand? Just like that devil Dylan Roof that went down there and killed all of them people, them black people in that church. You understand? He came in there like the subtle beast that he was. You understand? Spoke smooth words to these people. Oh, I'm a Christian and all of this nonsense, and then ultimately unalived them. Right. So let's get into this devil right here. Right. So on the screen, this is an actual photo of Al Capone. You understand? A very ghoulish looking character, if you would. You understand? You can look into this man's eyes and see the demon that's in him, right? Alphonse Gabriel Capone, you understand? Born January 17th, 1899, died January 25th, 1947. Sometimes known by his nickname Scarface, was an American gangster and businessman who attained notoriety during the Prohibition era as the co-founder and boss of the Chicago outfit from 1925 to 1931. His 7-year reign as a crime boss ended when he went to prison at the age of 33. Of course, you see the picture of the devil right there, right? Capone was born in New York City in 1899 to Italian immigrants. He joined the 5 Points gang as a teenager and became a bouncer in organized crime premises such as brothels, right? So Al Capone actually grew up in Brooklyn, right? And moved to Chicago in his early 20s. But a key thing about what they just said about his early life was he joined a group called the 5 Points Gang. Now, I just did a similar story about the devil, Lucky Luciano. You understand the godfather of the modern day La Cosa Nostra, if you will. But he was actually a part of the 5 Points Gang as well. You understand? And this figure that we talking about right now, Al Capone, it said he became a bouncer in organized crime premises such as brothels. You understand? And if you don't know what a brothel is essentially a whorehouse. You understand? Or a place where people come pay, excuse me, for women of the evening, as you will, right? It says Capone moved to Chicago and became a bodyguard of Johnny Torrio, head of a crime syndicate that illegally supplied alcohol, the forerunner of the outfit. So before the Chicago outfit was called the Chicago outfit, it was headed by Johnny Torrio. You understand? And they got their money off of illegally supplying alcohol, bootlegging. You understand? During the Prohibition era. Essentially, they were basically the drug dealers of the 1920s, right? Or the era of Prohibition, right? And was politically protected through the Union or Unoni Salagio, which means Union Siciliana, or the Sicilian Union, right? I'm gonna click right here. It says the Italian American National Union was a Sicilian American organization which controlled much of the Italian vote within the United States during the early 20th century. It was based in Chicago. It was a major source of conflict during Prohibition. So basically, this was a political organization, you understand, that a lot of Italians trusted in, and they were known to influence, you understand, the vote of the Italian people. This was basically like a political party for Italians, right? A conflict with the North Side Gang was instrumental in Capone's rise and fall. Now, Capone and Johnny Torrio, they lived on the south side of Chicago, and there was some other Italians. I forget the person who ran that region of Chicago. You understand? Now, of course, when you think of Chicago today, our people have been brainwashed to believe that being a criminal is black culture, which is a bold-faced lie. You understand? The original gangsters, thugs, and criminals of the city of Chicago were white men. You understand? And it's going to get into a lot of the corruption, you understand, in politics that went on in Chicago back in those times, and probably still do to this day. You understand? But the North Side Gang was an Italian crime syndicate, you understand, that ran the northern parts of Chicago, and they were in a conflict with the Italians that ran the southern region of the city of Chicago. You understand? So basically, this is like how Bloods and Crips go to war with each other, how Democrats and Republicans go to war with each other. This is the culture of Caucasians. You understand? Before you even heard of an O Block, you understand? Before there was a Cabrini Green projects in Chicago, you understand? Before there was a gang called the 60-30ins, you understand? Or a group of young brothers that grew up in gangs. Grew up in the city of Chicago. Before they were ever known as gang members, the gang members in Chicago were white men. You understand? Another famous gang in Chicago that was started by white men is called the Satan Disciples, which is, if that's not explaining you who the white man is, then I don't know what the hell. You know what I'm saying? Can't do nothing else for you as far as explaining them as a people, right? But reading on. A conflict with the Northside gang was instrumental in Capone's rise and fall. Torrio went into retirement after the Northside gunman almost killed him, handing control to Capone. Although Capone expanded the bootlegging business through increasingly violent means, his mutually profitable relationships with Mayor William Hale Thompson and the Chicago Police Department meant he seemed safe from law enforcement. So Capone was not only backed by the Chicago Police Department, you understand, which is a corrupt organization till this day, but the mayor at that time, William Hale Thompson, you understand, was also on Capone's payroll, which shows you how evil white men are. You understand? Capone got away with murder, literally, with the help of the mayor of the city of Chicago, as well as the police department. Capone apparently reveled in attention, such as the cheers from spectators, when he appeared at baseball games and Salakia. That's the characteristics of Caucasian men. You understand? Caucasian men are very prideful, right? When you read in the book of Obadiah, I believe, it says, the pride of thine heart have deceived thee. You understand? And this is no different during the times of Al Capone. He was a very proud criminal. You understand? He loved the attention that he got from being a feared figure in the city of Chicago. He made donations. He made donations to various charities and was viewed by many as a modern day Robin Hood. Now, when you look at Blacks, Latinos, and Native American Indian men, as far as like big figures on a totem pole of being criminals, you understand, and whatever day that they lived in, be it the founder of the Crips or be it the founder of the Gangster Disciples or the Black Disciples or Bumpy Johnson, you understand, or Frank Lucas or Frank Matthews. A lot of these criminal figures, big meats, you know what I'm saying, from Detroit, Convertible Burt down there in Florida. You understand? It's a lot of black men, Freeway Ricky Ross. You understand? A lot of these black men, well, not a lot of them, all of these black men that aspire to be criminals learned from people like Al Capone. Like, you literally have rappers, you understand, that name themselves after these criminals and take on the same characteristics, as far as like they called Al Capone a modern day Robin Hood. Well, that was the same thing that a lot of our black men in the ghettos of America that did a lot of crime did. You understand? They sold drugs to the community. You understand? They unalived a whole lot of people. You understand? As far as to protect their turf and drug money. And what they do around this time every year, they give toy drives. You understand? They pass out turkeys to black families. You understand? They come back, you understand, and give you food or just throw pennies at you. Understand? When meanwhile, these brothers have taken a part in destroying our neighborhoods. You understand? Just like the oppressors. And what they do is they give a little bit back. You understand? To make it seem like that they are a person that's uplifting the community or upstanding gentlemen in the community, when meanwhile they nothing different, you understand, if not worse than an oppressor, seeing that they destroy their own people and try to give back just to mask what type of destruction that they bring to the community. But they get this from the oppressor, you understand? Reading on. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre is in which 7 gang rivals were murdered in broad daylight, damaged the public image of Chicago and Capone, leading influential citizens to demand government action and newspapers to dub Capone public enemy number 1. Now, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre was I believe they're gonna get into it, but from what I remember, Capone had his men pose as ATF agents. You understand, and they They act like it was a raid on a warehouse, right? A warehouse that had a whole lot of alcohol in it during the Prohibition era. And what they did was they made these gang members, you know what I'm saying, put their hands on the wall and lined them up. And then they pulled out the gun of that day. You understand? They called it the street typewriter. That's what they called it. But it was it's called a Thomason. You understand? Nicknamed the Tommy gun. You understand? This was a automatic assault rifle. You understand? That shot anywhere from 20 to 100 bullets. You understand that held anywhere from 20 to 100 bullets, right? So they lined these dudes up, sprayed them down with these with the assault rifle of that day, the Tommy gun. You understand? And it was a big thing in Chicago because something like this had never happened before, right? Slovakia. Federal authorities became intent on jailing Capone, and charged him with 22 counts of tax evasion. You understand? Ain't that something? The feds and the police department and the mayor knew how corrupt this damn criminal was. You understand? He unalived a lot of people. You understand? Sold a lot of alcohol. You understand? But the government didn't care about none of that. All they cared about was they cut. You understand? So they indicted him on 22 counts of tax evasion. He was convicted of 5 counts in 1931. During a highly publicized case, the judge admitted as evidence Capone's admissions of his income and unpaid taxes made during prior and ultimately abortive negotiations to pay the government taxes he owed. He was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. After conviction, he replaced his defense team with experts in tax law, and his grounds for appeal were strengthened by a U.S. Supreme Court ruling. Although his appeal ultimately failed, Capone showed signs of neurosyphilis early in his sentence and became increasingly debilitated before being released after 8 years of incarceration. In 1947, he died of cardiac arrest after a stroke, and I'm sure he probably got that syphilis from sleeping with them whores. You understand? He definitely was a bouncer in the whorehouses. You understand? And to be that type of public figure. Well, I don't want to say public figure, but that type of figure in the criminal underworld, you understand? You got whores, drugs, you understand? Money, the finest clothes, everything, every vice that can destroy you, you understand? You have that at your disposal, understand? And of course, Capone being an oppressor, you understand? The son of the devil himself, they can't help themselves, you understand? This is how they live, right? The Lord said, I'm paraphrasing, but that which is made to be crooked can't be straightened. You understand? Right? So let's get into some of this devil's early life. Of course, this stuff is important because this is what shaped him, you understand, as a criminal. Hey, Shalom, sis. Y'all Shamar Al-Thaba, Shim Y'all Shah, sis. The water for checking in. Early life. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born in Brooklyn, a borough in New York City on January 17th, 1899. His parents were Italian immigrants, Teresa and Gabriel Capone. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Probably just a different spelling than Al Capone's middle name. Both born in Angri, a small municipality outside of Naples in the province of Salerno. His father was a barber and his mother was a seamstress. So his mother sold clothes and his father cut hair. Capone's family had immigrated to the United States in 1891 by ship, first going through the port city of Fiume, Austria-Hungary, modern-day Rijeka, Croatia. The family settled at 95 Navy Street in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. When Capone was aged 11, he and his family moved to 38 Garfield Place in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Of course, I'm not too familiar with the city of New York, me being from California. If anybody is in, if anybody's watching the class, you understand, get in the comments and let me know what section of Brooklyn did Al Capone actually grow up in. Capone's parents had 8 other children. James Vincenzo Capone, who later changed his name to Richard Hart and became a prohibition agent in Homer, Nebraska. God damn, Salakia. Ain't that a kawinky dink? This dude went on to be one of the biggest bootleggers, you understand? And his brother became a prohibition agent in Nebraska. He probably had ties to his brother, you understand? You know, probably gave him the heads up on raids and all of that type of stuff. But I'm gonna keep going. Raphael James Capone, also known as Ralph Capone or Bottles, who took charge of his brother's beverage industry. Salvatore Frank Capone, Ermina Capone, who died at the age of 1. Ermino John Capone, Albert Capone, Matthew Capone, and Mafalda Capone. Ralph and Frank worked with Al in his criminal empire. Whole family full of devils. There's a lot of their ass. Frank did so until death on April 1st, 1924. Excuse me. Frank ran Al's bottling companies, both legal and illegal, early on, and was also the front man for the Chicago outfit until he was in prison for tax evasion in 1932. So it wasn't just Al that was just running the streets of Chicago, wreaking havoc on the people. 2 of his brothers got in the family business or what have you also. Capone showed promise as a student, but had trouble with the rules at his strict parochial Catholic school. As you know, you understand, most Italians are Catholic, you understand? It's no different than a Southern white Christian man. They can call themselves God-fearing all they want, but the Caucasian man is the devil that the Bible speaks of, and they hate niggas. Excuse me. His schooling ended at the age of 14 after he was expelled for hitting a female teacher in the face. Whew, man, look, the scriptures say the wicked are estranged from the womb. You understand? He got expelled at 14 for firing on the teacher. Capone worked at odd jobs around Brooklyn, including a candy store and a bowling alley. From 1916 to 1918, he played semi-professional baseball. Following this, Capone was influenced by gangster Johnny Torrio, whom he came to regard as a mentor. Capone married Mae Josephine Coughlin at age 19. On December 30th of 1918, she was Irish Catholic, and earlier that month had given birth to their son, Albert Francis Sonny Capone. And he died in 2004. Albert lost most of his hearing in his left ear as a child. Capone was under the age of 21, and his parents had to consent in writing to the marriage. By all accounts, the two had a happy marriage. Okay, let's get into his life of crime. Capone initially became involved with the small-time gangs that included the Junior 40 Thieves and the Bowery Boys. He then joined the Brooklyn Rippers and then the powerful 5 Points gang based in Lower Manhattan. During his time, he was employed and mentored by fellow racketeer Frankie Yale, a bartender in a Coney Island dance hall and saloon called the Harvard Inn. Capone inadvertently insulted a woman while working the door. He would Salakia. And he was slashed with the knife 3 times on the left side of his face by her brother, Frank Galicio, Salakia. The wounds led to the nickname Scarface, which Capone loathed. The date when this occurred has been reported with inconsistencies. When Capone was photographed, he had the scar left side of his face, saying that the injuries were war wounds. He was called Snorky because his close friends, a term for a sharp dresser. In 1919, Capone left New York City for Chicago at the invitation of Torrio, who was imported by crime boss James Big Jim Colosimo as enforcer. Capone began in Chicago as a bouncer in a brothel, which is thought to be most likely where he contracted syphilis. See, you sleep with whores, you're going to get what whores have. You understand? Capone was aware of being infected at an early stage and timely. Excuse me, let me read that again. Capone was aware of being infected at an early age, and timely use of salvarsan probably could have cured the infection, but apparently never sought treatment. In 1923, Capone purchased a small house at 7244 South Prairie in the Park Manor neighborhoods in South Chicago, South Side, for $5,500. As originally reported in the Chicago Tribune, hijacker Joe Howard was killed on May 8, 1924, after he tried to interfere with Capone Torrio bootlegging business. In a 1936 article highlighting Capone's criminal career, the Tribune erroneously reported the date as May 7, 1923. So they would like you get in the way of their business with they bootlegging, they gonna unalive you. Same thing with drug dealers, you understand, during the later years of the history of America. You get involved with a drug dealer not being able to make his money how he sees fit, then they're going to take your life from you. In the early years of the decade, Capone's name began appearing in newspaper sports pages where he was described as a boxing promoter. Torrio took over Colosimo's criminal empire after the latter's murder on May 11, 1920, in which Capone was suspected of being involved. Slovakia. Hey, Shalom, sis. Y'all Shamala Thaba Shemal Shah. The water for tapping in. I definitely appreciate all of the support. Torrio headed an essentially Italian organized crime group that was the biggest in Chicago, with Capone as his right hand man. Torrio was wary of being drawn into gang wars and tried to negotiate agreements over territory between rival groups. Yeah, Torrio, he was kind of like a smart criminal. He understood that violence was bad for business, right? The smaller Northside gang, led by Dean O'Banion, Salakia, came under pressure from the Jenner brothers, the Jenner brothers, who were allied with Torrio. So O'Bannon, I'm not completely sure, but if this Northside gang was headed by Dean O'Bannon, let me make sure before I make this statement, because O'Bannon sounds like an Irish name, right? Surname O'Bannon. Slovakia. Last name O'Banian origin. Give me 1 second. I believe O'Banion is Irish because I know O'Neill has Iron origins. O'Brien. A lot of these surnames or last names. Yep. Absolutely. Charles Dean O'Banion. They said he was the head of an Irish gang in Chicago. That's crazy. Give y'all a quick side note too, just a quick sidebar, right? When I like to do this a lot, you understand, because it's like it's like one of my guilty pleasures, right? A lot of times, right, white people think that black people are so dumb and retarded, right, that we don't know who they are or who they're portraying to be as far as the origins of the country that they come from. You understand? Now, and what I mean by that is, I've done not a lot of research, but I've done a lot of I say paying attention in my life to seeing as far as how what type of certain last names white people have to kind of like pinpoint the country where they come from. And if you're talking to a white person, you understand, and they tell you their last name, or you have that kind of rapport with some Caucasians, and they tell you their last name, and you're able to tell them the origins of where their family come from based off of their last name, they shocked because niggas shouldn't even understand this. But I'll give y'all a quick story, right? Of course, this happened when I was in the world, right? When I was in the world, I went to jail for something. It was like a small petty crime. I had to stay in jail like overnight, right? So as I'm talking to the officers, I'm reading all of their last names and their badges and stuff, right? So as I'm talking to, it's probably like 5 or 6 of them right there. So, I'm just making small talk conversation, woo woo. So each one of them, like when I have my own chance to have a conversation with them, just making small talk, shooting the breeze, I'll just look at their name tag and be like, damn, you still got family over there in Ireland? Or oh man, what part of England does your family come from? Right. But every time that I'm having this conversation with them and I say that to them, they look at me shocked, like how the fuck do this young Negro know, you understand, that my people come from this land? But I'm gonna give y'all some quick game real quick, right? You see a last name, they got an O and an apostrophe, O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Banion, you understand? 9 times out of 10, them people are Irish, or they come from a background of Irish descent, right? A lot of Caucasians that have last names that end in vowels, not all of them, but a lot of them that has last names that end in vowels, like Capone or Gandolfini, you understand, or just a lot of last names that end with a vowel, A-E-I-O or U. A lot of times they're Italian. You understand? English should be obvious. You got your Williams. You understand? Your Tuckers. You understand? Jones. Things of that nature. England. You understand? When it comes to Jewish people, right? A lot of them have they have last names as far as it's like it's a prominent Jewish last name. A lot of their last names end in Stein or Berg. You understand? But that's just a quick sidebar. But it is it's something that I do, kind of, sir. it was Irish. Okay, Most High in Christ. I do the same thing, sir. I can tell where those Edomites. Nah, for sure. Hey, Most High in Christ, for sure. Scoutenberg is Burry is English also. Oh, yeah, you right. You right. Hey, Salakia. Brown Hornet 1975. If you could, Baba Kashad, man, put your name in the chat, brother. Yeah, but Salakia, that was just a quick sidebar, you understand? But we're going to get back into the life and crimes of this devil. Okay, where was I at? Okay, O'Banian found that Torrio was unhelpful with the Jenna's encroachment despite his pretensions to be a settler of his disputes. So O'Banian, he trusted in Torrio to basically get rid of the problems that he had with the Jenner brothers. You understand? And he found out that Torrio, you understand, didn't live up to his word, right? In a fateful step, Torrio arranged the murder of O'Banian at his flower shop on November 10th, 1924. This placed Jaime West at the head of the gang, backed by Vincent Drucci and Bugs Moran. Weiss, or West, I'm going to just call him West, I don't know how to pronounce that, had been a close friend of O'Banian, and the Northsiders made it a priority to get revenge on his killers. During Prohibition, Capone was involved with Canadian bootleggers who helped him smuggle liquor into the United States. When Capone was asked if he knew Rocco Perry, billed as Canada's king of the bootlegger, he replied, "Why? I don't even know which street Canada is on." Other sources claim that Capone has certainly visited Canada, where he maintained some hideaways, although the Royal Canadian Mounted Police states there is no evidence that he ever set foot on Canada soil. So they trying to get him tied in with them bootleggers in Canada, you understand? Because Canada is right there in that region, you understand? You can drive from a lot of different places in that part of America to Canada because it's right there on the border of Canada, right? An ambush in 1924 left Capone shaken but unhurt. 12 days later, Torrio was returning from a shopping trip when he was shot several times. After recovering, he effectively resigned and handed control over to Capone, aged 26, who became the new boss of an organization that took in illegal breweries and a transportation network that reached to Canada with political and law enforcement protection. Ooh-wee. Imagine that, right? Raheem, Most High in Christ, brother. So imagine that. Capone, you understand, his boss and his mentor get slid on, right? The mentor, like, hey, what A said and paid in full, he was like, I'm out the game, baby. My body different. he cool, like I'm good. You know what I'm saying? Y'all niggas can have this. That's what he essentially said. So he turned over the organization to Capone. Now imagine being 26 years old, the head of international bootleg organization, you understand, with police protection. You understand? You 26 years old, right? And it says in a transportation network that reached to Canada, and he 26 years old, man. Al Capone was turned up in Chicago. You understand? In turn, he was able to use more violence to increase revenue, of course, because when you're 26 years old, you understand, and you live in that life, and you got the power that he had, you understand, in the world at your fingertips, you feel like you can't be stopped, right? Any establishment that refused to purchase liquor from Capone often got blown up, and as many as 100 people were killed in such bombings during the 1920s. rivals saw Capone as responsible for the proliferation of brothels in the city. God damn. Hold on, man. So, not only what was Capone smashing on people, he like, man, look, you don't buy liquor from us, we gonna blow up your establishment. You understand? And then he was the sole purpose for all of these brothels to pop up during that time. You understand? So Capone had a hand in essentially all organized crime in the city of Chicago at that time. And I've been to Chicago one time before. That is a gigantic city. You understand? Like it's possible to live in Chicago, especially at that time in the south side of Chicago. You understand? And never see a certain part of the city for your whole life, because geographically the city of Chicago is a huge place to live. You understand? Capone often enlisted the help of local members of the black community into his organizations. Jazz musicians, Milt Hilton and Lionel Hampton had uncles who worked for Capone on Chicago's South Side. Once again, you understand? These Caucasians, yeah, they hate niggas, of course, you understand? But if they're able to make money off of black people in our neighborhoods, then they're going to do just that, you understand? A lot of them Italian mobsters, they hated black people during the same time, you understand, when people like Bumpy Johnson ran the streets of Harlem, you understand? But yet they still did business with him in being able to sell him drugs at a cheap price, you understand, so he can flood the black community, right? Because let's face it, ain't no white people coming into the black community to sell no goddamn heroin to us. They gonna use us, you understand? Salakia. Where was I at? Salakia. Okay, here we go. A fan of jazz as well, Capone once asked clarinetist Johnny Dodge to play a number that Dodge did not know. Capone split a $100 bill in half and told Dodge that he would get the other half when he learned it. The devil. That's crazy. Capone also sent 2 bodyguards to accompany jazz pianist Earl Hines on a road trip. Capone indulged in custom suits, cigars, gourmet food and drink, and female companionship. You understand? A glutton. You understand? Just how the Caucasian man is. You understand? Like, they want everything, right? All of the finest suits, cigars, you understand? All of the abominations. When they talking about gourmet food, yeah, he ate the best steaks, you understand? But he also ate them shrimps, them crabs, them lobsters, you understand? And indulged in a whole lot of alcoholic beverages, you understand? Most likely partook in a lot of drug use too, and female companionship, you understand? AKA, dealing with a lot of whores. He was particularly known for his flamboyant and costly jewelry. His favorite responses to questions about his activities were, "I am just a businessman, giving the people what they want, and all I do is satisfy a public demand." Capone had become a national celebrity and talking point. That's the door. He said, he's just a businessman and giving people what they want. You understand? That's the same thing. That's the same type of mind frame, you understand, that a lot of black people have when you talk about people being drug dealers in our communities. Oh, man, look, if they don't buy it from me, they're gonna buy it from somebody else. That's exactly what Capone basically said. You understand? Capone based himself in Cicero, Illinois, after using bribery and widespread intimidation to take over town council elections. making it difficult for the Northsiders to target him. Now, when you look at Cicero, Illinois is it's like a suburb of Chicago outside the city of Chicago. You understand? You would have to take, I think, what's that freeway? I think that's the 290 freeway going west of Chicago. You understand? And it's like a different environment versus being inside the city of Chicago, right? Capone's drivers found Capone's driver was found tortured and murdered, and there was an attempt on Wes's life in the Chicago Loop. On September 20 of 1926, the Northsiders used a ploy outside Capone's headquarters at the Hawthorne Inn aimed at drawing him to the windows. Gunmen in several cars then opened fire with Thompson submachine guns and shotguns at the windows on the first floor restaurant. Capone was unhurt and called for a truce, but the negotiations fell flat. 3 weeks later, on October 11th, West was killed outside the Northsiders' headquarters at O'Banion's former flower shop. The owner of Hawthorne's restaurant was a friend of Chicago's, and he was kidnapped and killed by Moran and Drucci in 1927. So they had a whole lot of back and forth gang violence going on. You understand? With between Chicago, the Chicago outfit headed by Al Capone and the North Side gang, the Italians, the Irish, that they was in a war with. You understand? Capone became increasingly security minded and desirous of getting away from Chicago. As a precaution, he and his entourage would often show up suddenly at one of Chicago's train depots and buy up an entire Pullman sleeping car on a night train to Cleveland, Omaha, Kansas City, Little Rock, or Hot Springs, Arkansas, where they would spend a week in luxury hotels under assumed names. In 1928, Capone paid $40,000 to Clarence Busk of the Onhur Busk brewing family for a 10,000 square foot home at 93 Palm Avenue on Palm Island, Florida, between Miami and Miami Beach. Al Capone was getting some money off this bootlegging. In November 1925, Antonio Lombardo, who was Capone's concierge, right? A concierge is basically an advisor or the person that gives advice to like a mob boss, you understand, or criminal entity. Is somebody that has a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom as far as the business, you understand, that they are in, and they basically give them advice on keeping the business running straight, or it might be a conflict that they have or some type of issue that they have. So they'll go to this concierge, you understand, and get counsel, for lack of better terms, on what they should do in certain situations, right? It says who was named head of the Union Siciliana, a Sicilian American benevolent society that had been corrupted by gangsters, and infuriated Joe Aiello, who had wanted the position himself, believed Capone was responsible from Lombardo's accession and resented the non-Sicilians' attempts to manipulate affairs within the Union. Aiello severed all personal and business ties with Lombardo and entered into a feud with Capone. Aiello allied himself with several of Capone's enemies, including Jack Zuda, who ran vice and gambling houses together. Aiello plotted to eliminate both Lombardo and Capone and started in the spring of 1927. And starting in the spring of 1927, made several attempts to assassinate Capone. On one occasion, a yellow offered money to the chef of Joseph Diamond Joe Esposito's Bella Napoli Cafe, Capone's favorite restaurant, to put prussic acid in Capone's and Lombardo's soup. Reports indicated he offered between $10,000 and $35,000. Instead, the chef exposed the plot to Capone, who responded by dispatching men to destroy Aiello's bakery on West Division Street with submachine gun fire. More than 200 bullets were fired into the bakery, and on May 28, 1927, wounding Aiello's brother Antonio. Man, these dudes was going at it. You understand? And y'all got to think about it. This the 1920s that we talking about. The roaring 20s for some, you understand? Great Depression for a lot, you understand? But these modern day cowboys at that time, you understand? They were the ones that were the criminals in the 1920s. You understand? But the crazy part about being a white man, you understand, they don't vilify them on the evening news every night. You understand? You don't see like yeah, of course you were seeing stuff in the papers and all of that type of stuff, right? But you weren't they didn't how can I put this? They didn't taint the image of white men to make the world or America believe that all white men are like this, when a lot of them are. You understand? Like how they do black men. Black men, the reason why a black man can walk in a white neighborhood or in a downtown area and some white woman see you and clutch their purse is because they've perpetuated this negative image of black men in movies, you understand, in music, right, in the media, right, on the news. Meanwhile, you got gangsters like Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, you understand, who are the real criminals of America, you understand? And when you read historical accounts like this, you understand, they're still not being vilified on TV or being stereotyped to be these okay corral type of fellas, you understand, which they are, right? During the summer and autumn of 1927, a number of hitmen Aiello hired to kill Capone were themselves slain. Among them, Anthony Russo and Vincent Spicuzza, each of whom had been offered $25,000 by Aiello to kill Capone and Lombardo. Aiello eventually offered a $50,000 bounty to anyone who eliminated Capone. Now, Salakia, I gotta look this up real quick. What is the equivalent of $50,000 in 1927 today? God damn, Salakia. So, and this is from this from a couple sources. So $50,000 in 1927 is equivalent to it's equivalent to $866,514 in 2024. So when you see, and this is the perfect analogy, right? The brother King Von allegedly put $100,000 bounty on another brother's head, you understand, and ultimately he was unalived, but he offered these people $100,000 on his brother's head. Man, look, they put $50,000 on Al Capone's head in Chicago in 1927, which is the equivalent to 800,000. You understand? Like, black men, we don't have no fucking business being criminals. What I'm trying to get at. We have no, like these dudes was putting $50,000 on your head in the 1920s. They will really get you killed and nobody will go to jail for it. You understand? Black, Latino, and Native American Indian men, like, I'm doing this series called Criminals of the Caucasus, you understand? For two reasons. One, for us to understand that being a criminal is not our culture. This is their culture. You understand? Number two, to give you the history of how white men actually founded this country. You understand? We don't come from being gangsters. You understand? Drug dealers, bootleggers. That's not black people's legacy. We was princes. You understand? We was priests and prophets. We were people that feared the Most High. You understand? We weren't murderers. We weren't drunkards. We weren't drug dealers. Now, of course, our people have failed and fallen short, you understand, of keeping the laws of the Most High. Of course, we've always messed up throughout history. But as a people, this has never been our culture. This is Al Capone's culture. You understand? This is Lucky Luciano's culture. This is Christopher Columbus's culture. This is their culture. Get them people they goddamn culture back and start living how you supposed to live. Salakia. At least 10 gunmen tried to collect on the bounty but ended up dead. Capone wasn't to be played with. Capone's ally, Ralph Sheldon, attempted to kill both Capone and Lombardo for Aiello's reward. But Capone henchman, Frank Nitti was another terrible Italian dude that had a couple loose screws. Had an intelligence network that learned of the traction and had Sheldon shot in the front of a West Side hotel, although he survived the incident. In 1927, Aiello organized machine gun ambushes across from Lombardo's home at a cigarette store frequented by Capone. But those plans were foiled after an anonymous tip led police to raid several addresses and arrest Milwaukee gunman Angelo Lamantio and 4 other Aiello gunmen. After the police discovered receipts for the apartments in Lamantio's pockets, he confessed that Aiello had hired him to kill Capone and Lombardo, leading the arrest to Aiello himself and bring him to the South Clark Street police station. Upon learning of the arrest, Capone dispatched nearly 24 gunmen to stand guard outside the station and wait for Aiello's release. The men made no attempt to conceal their purpose there, and reporters and photographers rushed to the scene to observe Aiello's expected murder. God damn. Look, these white people is wild. They literally heard Aiello get arrested. You understand? Capone sent his dudes over there to wait for him to release. We know he finna get bailed out. You understand? Wait for his release so when he come outside, they could walk him down. They just came out with their guns in their hand. You understand? They ain't concealing no weapons, right? And the news, they like, ooh, I'm finna get the drop on this story. They like, man, look, they rushed over there to basically, you know what I'm saying, be eyewitnesses to this gangster's murder, right? When released, Aiello was given a police escort out of the station to safety. He later failed to make a court appearance after his attorney claimed he suffered a nervous breakdown. Aiello disappeared with some family members to Trenton, New Jersey, where he continued his campaign against Capone and Lombardo. Political alliances. Chicago politicians had long been associated with questionable methods and even newspaper circulation wars. But the need for bootleggers to have protection in City Hall introduced a far more serious level of violence and graft. Capone is generally seen as having an appreciable effect in bringing about the victory of Republican mayor candidate William Held Thompson, who had campaigned on a platform of not enforcing prohibition and at one time hinted that he'd reopen illegal saloons. That's why Capone fooled with William Thompson, the mayor of Chicago at that time. He helped him get him in there, you understand? And of course, he returned the favor, you understand, by turning a blind eye to Capone's criminal organization. Thomas allegedly accepted a contribution of $250,000 from Capone. Thompson beat Democratic candidate William Emmett Dever in the 1927 mayoral race by a relatively slim margin. On the day of the pineapple primary on April 10th, 1928, voting booths were targeted by Capone's brother James Belcastro in wards where Thompson's opponents were thought to have support, causing the deaths of at least 15 people. Belcastro was accused of murdering lawyer Octavius Granady, an African American who challenged Thompson's candidate for the black vote and was chased through the streets on polling day by cars of gunmen before being shot dead. Wow, man, they was doing a whole lot. And look, blacks, Latinos, Native American Indians, stay out of these white folks' business. You understand? This brother Octavius Granady, he should have stayed out of them white folks' business. You understand? He probably wouldn't have been able to live a more prosperous life. You understand? He lost his life by getting in these white folks' business. They ain't got nothing to do with us. Salakia. 4 policemen were among those charged with Belcastro, but all charges were dropped after key witnesses recanted their statements. In Salakia. An indication of attitude of local law enforcement toward Capone's organized crime came in 1931 when Belcastro was wounded in a shooting. Police suggested to skeptical journalists that Belcastro was an independent operator. A 1929 report by the New York Times connected Capone to the 1926 murder of Assistant State Attorney William H. McSwagan. Excuse me. The 1928 murders of Chief Investigator Ben Newmark and former mentor Frankie Yale. This boy Capone was turned up in the streets of Chicago and New York before he left. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, like these are literally the life and times of Al Capone. Black men who think they're gangsters, who think you a real like this a real street cat. This a real gangster right here. They putting money on people's heads. You understand? They knocking off political figures, right? They making millions of dollars off bootleg and alcohol. You understand? And they getting away with it. Capone was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, despite being at his Florida home at the time of the massacre. The massacre was an attempt to eliminate Bugs Morin, head of the Northside Gang, and the motivation for the plan may have been the fact that some expensive whiskey that was illegally imported from Canada via the Detroit River had been hijacked while it was being transported to Cook County, Illinois. Moran was the last survivor of the North Side gunman. His succession had come about because his similarly aggressive predecessors, Wes and Vincent Drucci, had been killed in violence that followed the murder of the original leader, Dean O'Banion. To monitor their targets' habits and movements, Capone's men rented an apartment across from the trucking warehouse and garage at 2122 North Clark Street, which served as Moran's headquarters. Now, like black people, we this is what you call lying in wait. You understand? This dude, he rented an apartment. You understand? Like you they gotta come up with a lease. You gotta pay rent monthly. You understand? He did all of this just to stalk his prey. You understand? Just to stalk the Chicago people call it the ops. These is his ops back in the day. You understand? But he rented an apartment just to take him out, right? On the morning of Thursday, February, I'm about to say September. Salaki, where's my mind? Thursday, February 14, 1929, Capone's lookouts signaled for 4 gunmen disguised as police officers to initiate a police raid. The Fox police lined the 7 victims along a wall and signaled for accomplices armed with machine guns and shotguns. Moran was not among the victims. Photos of the slain victims shocked the public and damaged Capone's image. Within days, Capone received a summons to testify before a Chicago grand jury on charges of federal prohibition violations, but he claimed to be too unwell to attend. In an effort to clean up his image, Capone donated to charities and sponsored a soup kitchen in Chicago during the Depression. The St. Valentine's Day massacre led to public outcry about Thompson's alliance with Capone, and this was a factor in Anton J. Cermak winning the mayoral election on April 6, 1931. Let me see. Okay, it says, I'm not going to read everything else. Say he ended his feud with a yellow, right? Federal intervention. Okay, let's go to his tax evasion. Tax evasion. U.S. Attorney General Mabel Walker Willebrandt is said to have originated the tactic of charging obviously wealthy crime figures with federal tax evasion on the bias of their luxurious lifestyles. In 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Sullivan that the approach was legally sound. Illegally earned income was subject to income tax. Wow. Told you, the white folks want their money, man. They don't give a damn how you got it. The key to Capone's conviction on tax charges was not his spending, but proving his income. And the most valuable evidence in the regard originated in his offer to pay tax. Ralph, his brother and a gangster in his own right, was tried for tax evasion in 1930. Ralph spent the next 18 months in prison after being convicted in a 2-week trial over which Wickerson presided. Okay, hold on. Skip down. I'm going to keep going. Seeking to avoid the same fate, Capone ordered his lawyer to regularize his tax position, and although it was not done, his lawyer made crucial admissions when stating the income that Capone was willing to pay tax on for various years, admitting income of $100,000 for 1928 and 1929. For instance, hence, without any investigation, the government had been giving a letter from a lawyer acting for Capone conceding his large taxable income for certain years he had paid no tax on. On March 13, 1931, Capone was charged with income tax evasion for 1924 in a secret grand jury. On June 5th, 1931, Capone was indicted by a federal grand jury on 22 counts of income tax evasion from 1925 to 1929. He was arrested on $50,000 bail. Damn. Like I said, $50,000 was the equivalent of almost $900,000. So he almost had $1 million bail for tax evasion. Capone was then indicted on 5,000 violations of the Volstead Act prohibition laws. On June 16, 1931, the Chicago federal building in the courtroom of Wickerson, Capone pleaded guilty to tax evasion and the 5,000 Volstead Act violations as part of a 2.5-year prison sentence plea bargain. On July 30 of 1931, Wickerson refused to honor the plea bargain, and Capone's counsel rescinded the guilty plea. On the second day of the trial, Wickerson deemed that the 1930 letter to federal authorities could be admitted into evidence, overruling objections that a lawyer could not confess for his client. Wickerson later tried Capone only on the income tax evasion charges, as he determined they took precedence over the Volstead Act charges, right? So he only indicted him on the income tax charges because the Volstead Act charges, he wasn't really going to get too much time for that. You understand? They wanted Capone to serve some prison time. Much was later made of other evidence, such as witnesses and ledgers, but those strongly implied Capone's control rather than starting it. Capone's lawyers, who had relied on the plea bargain Wickerson refused to honor, therefore had mere hours to prepare for trial, ran a weak defense focus on claiming that essentially all his income was lost to gambling. This would have been irrelevant regardless, since gambling losses can only be subtracted from gambling winnings. But it was further undercut by Capone's expenses, which were well beyond what his claimed income could support. Wickerson allowed Capone's spending to be presented as a very great length. At very great length. The government charged Capone with evasion of $215,000 in taxes on a total income of $1,038,654 during the 5-year period. Capone was convicted on 5 counts of income tax evasion on October 17, 1931, and was sentenced a week later to 11 years in federal prison, fined $50,000 plus $7,692,000 for court costs, and was held liable for $215,000 plus interest due on his back taxes. The contempt of court sentence was served concurrently. New lawyers hired to represent Capone were Washington-based tax experts. They filed a writ of habeas corpus based on Supreme Court ruling that tax evasion was not fraud, which apparently meant that Capone had been convicted on charges relating to years that were actually outside the time limit of prosecution. However, a judge interpreted the law so that the time that Capone had spent in Miami was subtracted from the age of the offenses, thereby denying the appeal of both Capone's conviction and sentence. Capone was sent to Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary in 1932 at age 33. Upon his arrival at Atlanta, Capone was officially diagnosed with syphilis and gonorrhea. Ooh, that's rough. He was also experienced withdrawal symptoms from cocaine addiction. Man, told you he was off that shit. Excuse me. The use of which had performed his perforated his nasal spectrum. Capone was competent at his prison job of stitching soles on shoes for 8 hours a day, but his letters were barely coherent. He was seen as a weak personality and so out of his depth dealing with bullying at the hands of fellow inmates that his cellmate, seasoned convict Red Radinsky, feared that Capone would have a breakdown. Radinsky was formerly a small-time criminal associated with the Capone gang and found himself becoming a protector for Capone. The conspicuous protection of Radinsky and other prisoners drew accusations from less friendly inmates and fueled suspicion that Capone was receiving special treatment. Salakia. No solid evidence ever emerged, but it formed part of the rationale for moving Capone to the recently opened Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary off the coast of San Francisco in August 1934. On June 23, 1936, Capone was stabbed and superficially wounded by fellow Alcatraz inmate James C. Lucas. Capone went from being a big gangster, you understand, to being a shell of himself sitting in a prison cell, you understand, having to be protected by people, you understand, that was associated with his criminal organization that he probably never had a conversation with on the streets. Due to his good behavior, Capone was permitted to play banjo in the Alcatraz prison band, the Rock Islanders, which gave regular Sunday concerts for other inmates. Ooh, that boy hit rock bottom. No pun intended. That nigga was in a prison band called the Rock Islanders at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. You understand? That's literally on a goddamn rock island in the San Francisco Bay Area. Man, you can't make this shit up. Capone was also transcribed the song Madonna Mia, creating his own arrangement as a tribute to his wife, May. At Alcatraz, Capone's decline became increasingly evident as neurosyphilis progressively eroded his mental faculties. His formal diagnosis of syphilis of the brain made in February 1938. Excuse me. He spent the last year of his Alcatraz sentence in the hospital section, confused and disoriented. Capone completed his term in Alcatraz on January 6, 1939, and was transferred to the Federal Correction Institution at Terminal Island in California to serve out his sentence for contempt of court. He was paroled on November 16, 1939, after his wife May appeared to the court based on his reduced mental capabilities. I'm going to read his illness and death, and I'm going to get a couple scriptures, and we're going to end it. Due to his failing health, Capone was released from prison on November 16, 1939, and referred to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for treatment of how you pronounce this? Syphilitic paresis, Salakia. Based on his unsavory reputation, Johns Hopkins refused to treat him, but Baltimore's Union Memorial Hospital did. Capone was grateful for the compassionate care that he received and donated 2 Japanese weeping cherries to the Union Memorial Hospital in 1939. After a few weeks of inpatient and outpatient care, on March 20th, 1940, a very sickly Capone left Baltimore and traveled to his mansion in Palm Island, Florida. In 1942, after mass production of penicillin was started in the United States, Capone was one of the first patients treated by the new drug. Though it was too late for him to reverse the damage to his brain, it did slow down the progression of the disease. In 1946, his physician, and a Baltimore psychiatrist examined him and concluded that Capone had the mentality of a 12-year-old child. He spent the last years of his life at Palm Island Mansion, spending time with his wife and grandchildren. On January 21st, 1947, Capone had a stroke. He regained consciousness and started to improve, but contracted bronchopneumonia. He suffered a cardiac arrest on January 22nd, and on January 25th, surrounded by his family in his home, died after his heart failed as a result of apoplexy. His body was transported back to Chicago a week later, and a private funeral was held. He was originally buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Chicago. In 1950, Capone's remains, along with those of his father Gabriel and brother Frank, were moved to Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. Slovakia. Well, stop sharing. Yeah, so those was the life and times of Chicago gangster Al Capone. Slovakia. Let me get a couple scripts. Of course, I'm going to go to Proverbs 3:31. That's going to be a reoccurring scripture, you understand, throughout this series, which is a very important scripture for the children of Israel, especially Black, Latino, Native American, Indian men, you understand? And listening to the history of people like this. This is the book of Proverbs, chapter 3 and verse 31. Envy thou not the oppressor and choose none of his ways. The Lord is telling us to not envy our oppressors and don't choose their ways, because, of course, they don't have the laws like how we have the laws. You understand? Like, when you read Psalms, the 147th chapter, so like I'm going to read that right now. It's the book of Psalms, chapter 147 and verse 19. He showeth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. Verse 20. He have not dealt so with any nation, and as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise ye the Lord. You understand? These nations don't know the judgments of the Lord. You understand? There's millions of Al Capones that lived out there, you understand, that was able to do all type of violence, all type of evilness. You understand? And they lived long and prosperous lives doing it. You understand? But when you look at us as a people, you understand, the majority of the time, you understand, like we got a famous saying in the Black community: when you live in a street life, you're either gonna be dead or in jail. You understand? This dude was able to rule the streets, you understand, of Chicago with an iron fist and be successful at it. Now, of course, it was for a short amount of time, you understand, but at the same time, though, our people meet our demise faster than people like Al Capone, because we know the judgments of the Lord. You understand? The Lord not playing with us when it comes to us being a drug dealer. He ain't playing with us when it comes to us dealing with whores. You understand? When it comes to us being a people that disobey the laws of the Most High that he gave to us to preserve our lives. You understand? Now, them Caucasians, let them be criminals. Let them indulge in everything that's up under the sun. You understand? Whether good or bad. You understand? That's their business. But us, Black, Latino, and Native American Indian men, we understand the judgments of the Lord. You understand? It's very few of us that get to live to the age that Al Capone got to live to. You understand? There's very few of us that are able to be in a position of power. You understand? None of us have really been in a position of power like Al Capone, you understand, to be able to rule a city with an iron fist, and the mayor and the police know all of the manner of evil that you're doing, but you're still allowed to be successful in your life of crime. That ain't what the Lord got for us. You understand? The Lord got death, you understand, diseases, jail, and a whole lot of evilness that's going to befall you, you understand, if you do not keep these laws, statutes, and commandments. Let me get a couple more. You understand? Salakia. Job, let's go to Job. Job 9:24. Salakia. Come on, phone. The book of Job, chapter 9 and verse 24. The earth is given into the hands of the wicked. He covered the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? You understand? The earth is given into the hands of the wicked. You understand? He covered the faces of the judges thereof. Like when you read the Bible and have a depiction of the saints, you understand, or the judges or the high priests, right, that are in these scriptures, that these sacred and holy records are talking about, you picture Caucasian people, because those same wicked people that covered up the faces of the judges thereof, the earth was given into their hands. Al Capone had the world at his fingertips. You understand? He did exactly what the hell he wanted to do, when he wanted to do it. You understand? How he wanted to do it, right? Because the Lord allowed them to live deliciously for a point of time. You understand? Now, of course, the Lord is going to the Lord is going to eradicate these evil beings, you understand, from being on planet Earth altogether. But at the same time, no, right now the earth is given into the hands of the wicked. They run this shit. You understand? Salakia. Let me get go to Genesis. What was that? 27. This book of Genesis, chapter 27 and verse 40. And by the sword shalt thou live. You understand? That's what the Lord said these Edomites was going to do. They're going to live by the sword. You understand? To like you hear black people say, live by the gun, die by the gun, right? They have you to believe that, oh, just owning a firearm, you understand, or keeping a gun around you for protection is living by your gun. No, that's not living by your gun. Living by your gun is what Al Capone did. You understand? Lining people up and slaughtering people, right? Because they get in the way of your illegal activities, you understand, and you gaining money. That's what it means to live by the gun, to be a robber, you understand, to be a cat that's a murder for hire type of dude, you understand? To like when you live by your gun, you use this gun or this sword, the modern day sword. You use this gun in order to eat, in order to keep, in order to stay alive. You understand? That's what it means to live by your gun. You understand? With this weapon, you understand, you protecting your ill-gotten goods. You understand? And you will knock somebody off. You understand? At the drop of a dime. You understand? Because in order to protect your illegally gotten assets, you're going to use this gun to keep your criminal empire going. That's what it means to live by the gun. You understand? This has been another episode of Criminals of the Caucasus. You understand? The life and crimes of Al Capone. You understand? I want to say the water, the brothers and sisters that came in, Salakia, my brother, young man, Jesus, checking in. My sister, Michaela, you understand? The water sis for tapping in. My sister, Nizam Amah, the water for tapping in. You understand? The brother Raheem, the water to y'all for tapping in. Any viewers, you understand, that came in and tapped into the class and got us a view and clicked on us and support us. Most High in Christ for that. I want to say the water to y'all. You understand? Absolutely, sis. I am the bar, sis. Make sure y'all stay tuned. You understand? Every Sunday from 7 p.m. to around 8:30, 9 p.m., we're going to have another episode of Criminals of the Caucasus, Lord allow. You understand? To the brothers, Yahweh Ba'Shem, Yahweh Shah Baraka Thumb. To the sisters, Yahweh Shamar Alathun Ba'Shem, Yahweh Shah. The water to everybody for tapping in. Shalom, Israel.